Good evening, Northgate family and all the friends of Northgate. Once again, so happy to have you with us tonight as we continue in the book of Acts. We're in chapter 17 tonight. We're only going to be dealing with about 5 verses, so I'm not going to overload you with a lot of verses tonight. But next week, we'll finish up chapter 17. Let's go back to chapter 16 for a moment. Or actually, not 16, but let me see. I guess it was chapter 17, verse 15, and actually 10 through 15, and where Paul and Silas were in the city of Berea. And remember, when they got to Berea, they said that the people of Berea were a lot more open to what Paul and Silas had to teach them. They felt like they wanted to hear Paul and Silas speak and tell their story and tell the story about who Jesus is. But they also were the type of people who were in the scriptures all the time. And it says they daily read the scriptures and they daily discussed the scriptures. Albeit we're talking about the Old Testament is what they were discussing. So Paul, when they allowed him to speak, he connected Jesus with the Old Testament. Let them know that he was actually the Messiah that they read about in the Old Testament. So this was a good platform for Paul to talk to them about new faith in Jesus Christ and a new way to live. So here they were speaking to the Bereans, and while they were doing that, remember they had just left Thessalonica, and the Thessalonians were not too happy with the fact that they went over to Berea and started talking to the people over there. So what the Thessalonians did, some of them, a group of them that were against Paul and Silas, they went to Berea and caused trouble once again for Paul and Silas. But it was the Berean people who, and many of those people who became believers, they helped Paul and Silas escape once again. So where did he escape to? Well, we see here in verse 16 that Paul goes to Athens. He preaches in Athens. We're going to be looking at verses 16 through 21. So let's go there. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, and who he was waiting for was Timothy and Silas. They were waiting for them in Athens. But while he was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply troubled by all the idols that he saw everywhere in the city. So it says he went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles. And he spoke daily in the public square so that all who happened to be there, to all that happened to be there. He also had a debate with some of the Epicureans and the Stoic philosophers. When he told them about Jesus, and his resurrection, and they said this about Paul. They said, "What is this babbler trying to say with these strange ideas that he has picked up?" Others said, "He seems to be preaching about some foreign gods." Then they took him to the high council of the city. "Come and tell us about this new teaching." They said to him, "You're saying rather strange things, and we want to know what this is all about. It should be explained that all the Athenians, as well as the foreigners in Athens, seem to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas." Interesting portion of the scripture here. So here's Paul, and he's in Athens, and he's preaching to the people of Athens. For several centuries, let me tell you a little bit about Athens. Athens had been the most important city in the world for many, many centuries. But it had lost its political power. So when Paul was alive, it was the Romans who had become the political power of the region. And Rome then became the most important city when it came to politics. But Athens was still the most important city when it came to culture and art. So they were very, very artsy and all about culture in Athens. You might even call it the New Age of its time. You hear about people who are of the New Age here. So that's kind of what we could refer them to be like. And they were probably the New Age capital of the world at that time. So many people came there to teach in Athens. They taught about religion, but many people also came to learn about religion. And so, remember, they were talking about religion, and there were a number of different types of religions. They would also discuss the meaning of life. And so, but there's something that Paul noticed while he was walking around the city of Athens. There were idols everywhere. There were images of false gods everywhere. They were made from wood. They were made from metal. And today, people look at those things in Athens and they just consider them beautiful works of art. But back then, those images were made so that people would worship them. So it wasn't like it is today. You go to Greece, Athens, you'll see a lot of what we would now consider beautiful works of art. But then, these were idols that people literally worshipped. And that worship was wrong, that worship was wicked, and Paul knew it, and it bothered Paul. You know, there's 96 scriptures in the Bible where it talks about worshiping idols. We know that in Acts 20, we see, thou shalt have no other gods, or make no images, graven images before me. The Ten Commandments tell us. So later in a letter, Paul warned the Christians in Corinth about this, about the worship of idols. He told them that when pagans sacrifice something, what they actually do is they actually offer it to evil spirits. And Paul says, you don't offer those same things to God. You can't burn a sacrifice and offer it to God. That would not please God. God says you shall have no other gods before me. So when people worship false gods and idols, they're really worshiping evil spirits. And I'm sure there are people today who have idols and things that they worship. Well, Paul actually says, the scriptures bear this out, they're actually worshiping an evil spirit. So Paul was warning them to be very, very careful. So as Paul walked around the city of Athens, it says that he became very, very upset. He was troubled. The Greek word here for that was parousno. It meant to exasperate. It meant to provoke someone in their spirit. And that's what was happening to Paul. Paul says, my spirit is provoked. My spirit is upset. So Paul could have easily left the people there in Athens and left because he was so disgusted and so upset. But he chose to stay there for the people because he loved the people. And he wanted the people to know the meaning to that vacancy in their heart. You know, when people are worshiping other gods and when that God doesn't work, they would go to another one. And so when people do that, what they're doing is they're searching for reality and they're searching for truth. And so what happens is until Jesus comes into your life, that's as far as you need to go. That's as far as you need to look. Jesus will help you reconcile yourself to a holy and a loving God. So Paul stayed there and he told them the good news about Jesus. He talked about Jesus' life. He talked about his death. He talked about his resurrection from the dead. And so in verse 17, let's go there. Let's read verse 17 once again here. It says he went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and he spoke daily in the public square to all who happened to be there. And so while Paul waited for Silas and Timothy to come, he continued to preach, as was his custom, in the synagogue and in the local synagogue. So he went there. But he also went to the busy city marketplace. These places were called the marketplace. This is where many of them in Athens would go and talk philosophy, and they would talk ideas. They would have all these ideas about life and what it really meant. You know, 450 years prior to Paul, the city of Athens was famous for its Greek teacher, Socrates, and I'm sure you've heard that name before. Paul knew that the people in Athens, that they liked to discuss ideas in the public square. And this was Paul's best way. He wanted to get to the public square. He loved to debate with them and talk with them. But what he did was he preached, like I said, he preached the life of Jesus, the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And so in verse 18, Paul encounters a group, and we read it earlier, and they call themselves the Epicureans. And these are people who followed a guy by the name of Epicurus. Now, this was some 270 years before Christ. And so this guy Epicurus is so fascinated, I should say, the people of Athens at that time, and they became what they called Epicureans, and they followed this guy and his philosophy of life. But this was some like 250 years even before Christ. The Epicureans believed in false gods. They had their false gods, but also they said that these false gods really didn't have any interest in people's life. And so the Epicureans believed that people should just enjoy themselves as much as possible, and they avoided things like that caused them fear and pain and things like that. Just have a good life, and just avoid fear, avoid pain if you can. There was another group called the Stoics, and they were another type of people that Paul encountered, let's say in the market square. They followed a guy by the name of Zeno, and Zeno came 265 years before Christ. Now the Stoics believed in what they called a chief god, not a true god, not the real God, but a chief god. But they did not, as I say, they did not believe in the real God. They said that everything that happened to people in life was just because of fate. It was just supposed to happen. You lived, you got up and you went to work and you ate and slept, and then life was over and you were buried. The real God was of no relevance to the Stoics. So I'm telling you this because I want you to see what Paul was up against, okay? The Stoics had no hope for the future at all. They were not even like the Epicureans. They did not try to avoid pain. They believed that people should suffer and suffer bravely. If you're going to suffer, suffer bravely. Where the Epicureans said, oh, stay away from suffering altogether. Now these two groups there, they shared ideas, but their ideas, as Paul was saying, they're kind of old ideas. They're old ideas. They've been talking about that for hundreds of years. But even today, there are many people who believe in similar false ideas. You see them, you're faced with them just like I am. There's people who believe in socialism, that the whole separation of church and state, people been stouting that type of philosophy. How about socialism, a political and economic theory of life? Relativism. There are people who don't believe in absolutes. So we have them living with us today. Philosophical ideas. They sound good and they're good to debate and all that kind of stuff, but it really brings no one closer to God. It doesn't bring anyone closer to God. And so when Paul was there speaking to both the Epicureans and the Stoics, he was challenging them that there is the real God. He had a son. His name was Jesus. He's the Messiah we've been waiting for, and he's come. He lived. He died. This is what he taught us. And he was offering those people there in the marketplace in Athens life in Jesus Christ. So today people believe that there are people today who still believe that there's no need for a living God. There's no need to be accountable or submissive to one true God, but we know that that's not true. There are people today who believe only in themselves. You've heard it, and I've heard it too. I've asked people before, what do you believe in? I just believe in myself. I just believe in myself. Although the Epicureans and the Stoics had different ideas, they did agree together on one thing. They agreed about Paul. They called him a babbler, it said. It was their way of insulting Paul. They were saying that he was a teacher who took parts of other people's ideas and he put them together with other parts, and he taught these ideas as if they were own, but he said he was just grabbing ideas from other people that he talked to. No, Paul was grabbing the truth of who Jesus was. Paul had his own encounter with Jesus. He knew who Jesus was. He knew about the Holy Spirit. He knew that the fact that Jesus lived and died and rose again from the dead. That's who Paul was talking about. See, Paul could talk philosophically if he wanted to. He could wax eloquent with any of those guys, but he chose to talk to them about who Jesus was, and for that reason they called him a babbler. So the people of Athens, they didn't understand what Paul was meaning, it says. They thought that he was talking about two different gods. This is how far off they were. They thought that he was talking about one God who was called Jesus, and the other God was called resurrection. They actually thought that resurrection was God's name. And so in verses 19 and 20, let's go there real quick again. It says, then they took him to the high council of the city. Come and tell us all about this new teaching, they said. You are saying some rather strange things, and we want to know what this is all about. It should be explained that the Athenians, as well as the foreigners in Athens, seem to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas. So all they were really interested in was the latest ideas. And so they thought Paul had some late ideas. There were some people there, though, that wanted to know more about what Paul was talking about. They wanted to know about this man named Jesus, who was the Son of God. They probably thought that the people of the city might not want to believe in the local gods anymore, because they had a lot of them. There were statues everywhere. And so they took them to the high council. They took Paul and Silas to the high council to explain his teaching. In verse 21, Luke writes that the people of Athens loved to only talk about new ideas, but that this was all they had done every day. They would meet in the market square, and they would just talk ideas every day. Luke felt like they were wasting their time. Obviously, Paul thought after being with them, these people are just wasting time. But there were some people, as Paul went to the city of Athens and many other cities, there were many people who didn't believe, but there were also some people who did believe. And those people that did believe came to know Jesus Christ in a very personal way. They had an encounter with him that they would never be the same after that. But the other people of the city, all they wanted to do was talk about new ideas. They never really learned anything. These ideas were just ideas that they've been talking about for hundreds of years. But they never really learned anything. And if they did learn anything, they would never do anything about it. They would never do anything. They just like to talk. And I don't know about you, but I come across a lot of people who like to do a lot of talking, but never really do anything about it. I'm going to tell you, when you have an encounter with Jesus Christ, the real deal, not something that's false, not an idol, not anything else, he makes a difference in our lives, and we're never the same after that. Amen? I can't wait to get into next week's study. We'll stop right there. We're a little short tonight, but I just wanted you to be aware of a little bit of background of where Paul was at, and we'll finish out the chapter next week. All right? So God bless you. Have a great, great night, and hope to see you Sunday. Remember, if you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, and you have a favorite football team, it doesn't have to be any of the two teams that are playing, wear your jersey. And we're also going to have that whole Super Bowl thing at 3:30 anyway at the church. So feel welcome to come. Bring your friends. God bless you. Have a great night.